Welcome to An Honorable Profession, a podcast giving America hope since 2018. I'm Ryan Coonerty. Along with Debbie Cox Bultan of the New Deal, I'm lucky enough to be your co-host. An Honorable Profession is a New Deal Leaders podcast. The New Deal is an organization that supports the next generation of American leaders. From attorneys generals to state senators to mayors to school board members, these are the people that are pushing policies and politics that will respond to climate change, rebuild our economy, address racial injustice, and restore our democracy. These are incredibly talented people who have dedicated themselves to public service when their country and their communities needed it the most. Check out newdealleaders.org to see what I'm talking about.
On today's special episode of An Honorable Profession, I talk with Zach Wahls. You might remember Zach. He was previously on the show in 2021. He's a longtime New Deal leader and the youngest ever elected state senator in Iowa. But Zach joins me today with a different hat on, as executive director of the Next50, which invests in young leaders across the country. We are so excited to be announcing a partnership between Next50 and New Deal. We're going to be joining forces in our efforts to identify, support, and uplift rising common sense leaders across the country. Between us, we're going to be able to support them from candidate to elected official and back again. So Zach and I talk about this new partnership and the work of both organizations. We also talk about why young people serving in elected office is so important, what we can learn from our leaders about winning, and why community is so important to both of our work. I hope you enjoy this episode. Zach Wahls, welcome back to An Honorable Profession.
It's great to be back, Debbie.
So fun to see you today, and very excited to be talking to you because we both had big news, or having big news right now. We are announcing a new partnership between our two organizations for the New Deal and Next50, and I'm delighted that you've come on to talk a little bit about that and how we're going to work together and what you're up to and why we're doing this. So maybe I thought we'd just start with a little bit from you on, for those folks who are not familiar with Next50, why don't you give people a chance to meet Next50?
Absolutely. Well, it's great to be back with you. I know that we had the opportunity a few years ago to chat when I was serving as the Iowa Senate Minority Leader, and today serving as Executive Director of the Next50. We are essentially a bench building organization that was founded back in 2019. For the last 50 years, the right-wing conservative movement has had extensive national infrastructure that is dedicated to identifying, cultivating, training, and preparing right-wing conservative leaders. There is a whole constellation of these organizations that are out there. Your listeners and viewers may not have heard of them, but they've definitely heard of their alumni. People like Mitch McConnell, Mike Pence, Clarence Thomas, Antonin Scalia, a whole new generation now, people like Charlie Kirk, Candace Owens, who come out of that infrastructure, and now, of course, our Vice President of the United States, J.D. Vance. And we have seen the right wing really effectively identify, cultivate, support these young next generation leaders, and those young leaders have just really high upside on the right wing. And on the left, there hasn't ever really been anything that's really that comparable. And that was part of why the Next50 was founded in 2019, was to begin identifying some of those young up and coming leaders and help provide them with support. Over the years, our mission has evolved and the organization has grown. Today, we identify and endorse 50 up and coming leaders in every election cycle, predominantly at the state and local level. So whether that's fellow state legislators like myself, local leaders, and then a handful of folks who are running for the U.S. House or statewide office. This is our 6th year. We were founded in 2019, but the team is growing. Our mission has never been more important, and we're thrilled to be partnering with New Deal, given how much overlap we have already with the folks who we've been supporting, and what I view as really complementary strengths between New Deal and Next50. And the whole founding point of our organization and the reason it's in the name, we got to make sure that the next 50 years are different. And I think this partnership is going to be a big part of making sure that's true.
Yeah. And I'm so excited because, obviously, as you mentioned, you've been a New Deal leader for a long time as an Iowa State Senator. Some of the other team members that work with you have been around and active in New Deal in their capacity, Mari Manoogian and others. And, one of the reasons I'm excited about this partnership is I feel like New Deal has done such a great job for our 15 years in supporting elected officials, primarily younger, rising elected officials at the state and local level who are really carefully chosen because they're super effective. They're problem solvers. They are, and we see over our 15 years of these folks rising, like you said, some of these people that folks will know through the New Deal, like Pete Buttigieg, and the fact that we now have 3 governors, and Josh Shapiro, Josh Stein, and Matt Meyer, and 18 members of Congress, 3 in the Senate and 15 in the House. So some of whom are overlapping, as you said, with your endorsements. But we've been excited to watch those folks and to be part of their journey in rising. But we have, spent our time working on the governing side of the House, and doing that work. Once people are elected, to support them to be as effective as they can be in their legislature or mayor's office or whatever it is. And so I'm excited to kind of build out this capacity. And I think when you and I were talking about this, you had a really great vision of the life cycle of a candidate. And I'd love you to talk a little bit about that. But this idea that, we can support them on both sides of the house. So we can find those people that are running, you guys are supporting them, doing a great job of recruiting and endorsing and supporting. And then once they're in office, they come to New Deal and they're able to have that support as they govern. So maybe you could share a little bit more about your the back of the napkin thing you drew for me as we talked about that. Literally drew for me as we were talking about this.
I'm and anybody who gets to know me in real life, I'm a visual thinker. I was studying civil engineering in college before I kind of took a detour into advocacy and politics. And the way that I like to think about political life is that there's kind of these 3 distinct phases. You have campaigning for office, either as a first-time candidate or as a candidate running for re-election or for higher office. But campaigning is it's its own thing. Then you have the governing, which once you've hopefully won your campaign, you're in office, you have the opportunity to actually govern. And then you have your home life, which is, I think, especially for millennial and increasingly now Gen Z lawmakers, that's an increasingly important part of the conversation. And the way that we think about it, it's kind of like the recycling infographic, reduce, reuse, recycle, and kind of like the 3 R's or whatever. But if you campaign well, then you get the opportunity to govern. And if you govern effectively, you can maintain a healthy home life. And if you maintain a healthy home life, you have the capacity to campaign well. And so it becomes this virtuous, positive cycle. And when we talk with our leaders about how do they find balance in those 3 things, there's always give and take, right? Thankfully, you don't have to campaign literally 24/7, 365, even though sometimes it can feel that way, especially with all the TV ads as you get closer to elections. But we try to help our leaders find that balance. We operate primarily on the campaign side with our political action committee, but we also do some support work on the governing and home life side. But when I think about my experience as a New Dealer, those last 2 categories on the governing and to some extent on the home life piece, there's been a lot of support from New Deal. And so for us, it seemed like a very natural partnership to bring us together. And again, like frankly, to try and create comprehensive structures that can be competitive with what the right has done so effectively for so many decades. Because without having that support for young leaders, you're just not going to be able to be competitive.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to come back to a bunch of things you said, actually, but let me ask this question because it's a question we get a lot. How do you find the leaders that you endorse? How do you pick them? What's your criteria? What are you looking for?
Well, you already mentioned our excellent political director, Mari Manoogian. Mari's from the great state of Michigan, where she was a state representative for 2 terms. She was a New Dealer, and Mari flipped a historically Republican seat in Metro Detroit and held that seat through some competitive elections before leaving office and then joining the Next50 as our political director. We're really fortunate to have a national network of contacts in many of the battleground states all over the country. And when we are looking, what we're essentially starting to look at the competitive states and the competitive districts in those states. And we just try to see where are the candidates who are coming out. We talk to our contacts in those states, hear from folks who are on the ground. And then we watch very closely. We like to try and vet candidates very thoroughly before we make an endorsement by talking to our contacts in those states. And when we make our endorsements, there's essentially three things that we're looking for. The first is that candidates have to be under the age of 50 on election day. I understand that for some people, being 49 doesn't necessarily seem like a next generation leader, but let me tell you, Debbie, in our party, which is led by a lot of folks who are a lot older than 49, we certainly believe that that counts as next generation in our book. Second, you have to be running in a competitive district or state or nested within. So I'll use myself as an example. I'm in a very safe state Senate district, but I'm nested within one of the most competitive U.S. House districts in the United States. We had this district was decided by fewer than 1,000 votes in 2024, and I fully expect it will be very competitive again in the 2026 cycle. And then the last thing that we do is we like to build endorsement classes that are representative of the diversity of our party. And now I think sometimes, and especially now, diversity has become like this four-letter word. And we're not afraid of it because we understand that having candidates who are a good fit for their district, who match their district, and who are representative of our party more broadly is actually really important. And despite what other kind of preconceived notions people might have, the reality is that I don't think that we should be afraid of supporting candidates who are strong, competitive candidates, right? Who are good fits for their district is something that we need to be afraid of. And so we have supported leaders all over the country. We have an incredible group of folks who we've supported over the last three cycles. We only did about 15 endorsements in the 2020 cycle, but we've done 50 endorsements in each of the last two cycles. And we have a lot of overlap with NewDEAL, which is part of why we're so excited about this partnership.
Yeah, well, I think us too, and thanks for kind of walking us through that. And I would just want to add that I think one of the things that I'm excited about, in addition to everything you said, and as you said, NewDEAL is not focused only on kind of those competitive places. We've got people in red and blue and purple districts across the country, but I think a lot of the mindset that you kind of alluded to with the leaders, I think is one of the reasons I think I'm super excited. It's not surprising that there's a lot of overlap of people that you guys have chosen and people who come through NewDEAL. I think for us, our criteria is we're looking for people who are rising. Obviously, we talked a little bit about that, and who are governing from a place of trying to get stuff done, right? And I think that's that you didn't talk a lot about the ideology, but I would say that I think that it's really important to kind of to say out loud that I feel like we both see ourselves as part of the kind of center left ecosystem of people who are in the part of the party they're trying to focus on results, on bringing people together and getting stuff done. And I think that's a really important part of when we think about the future of the party and the country. It's elevating those types of leaders that I think are going to make sure that we're competitive going forward across the country, as you said. And so maybe you can add a little bit on that point too.
100%. I mean, as an organization, we're looking for people who can. So every cycle we do a debrief. We try to look through our results, who won, who lost, among the winners, why did they win. This last cycle, which is obviously a very challenging election cycle for the Democratic Party across the country. And we don't exclusively endorse Democrats. We have some folks who are running as independents or in some of these nonpartisan races, like a lot of our local elections are not actually partisan elections. But one of the things that was true for 70% of our leaders won, so 35 out of our 50, which we thought was pretty good. And the average margin at these races was under 3 points. So 2.98 was the average margin. And 7 of our 50 leaders, so 15% of our leaders overall and 20% of our winners won their races by fewer than 1,000 votes. I mean, very competitive races.
Yeah.
And one of the things that a lot of the winners had in common was that they may not necessarily identify as like a moderate or a center left person, but they bring a very pragmatic approach to how they govern, right? To your point, they're not looking for an ideological solution. They're looking for what works. Mm-hmm. And what they have found, or what we have seen, is that pragmatic approach really has resonated in these competitive states and districts. And so as the Democratic Party is trying to think more broadly about how do you win in the midterms in 2026, how do you reestablish a congressional check on President Trump. I think a big part of it is going to be finding those pragmatic candidates who are closer to the middle than they are to the far left, who are going to be competitive in those states. And what we have seen is that those folks tend to be winning competitive elections. And the other thing that I would mention, in addition to the pragmatic approach, is a commitment to meeting voters where they are. And that can look different in every district. We had one of our candidates up in Alaska. I mean, for her legislative district is like the size of Germany. So it's like flying the seaplane to these different villages and talking with Native Alaskans about the challenges of their communities. For Ruben Gallego, who was someone who had been on our leadership council in 2022 and then was running for the U.S. Senate in 2024, it meant like literally hiking into Arizona backcountry to go talk to indigenous folks and Native American folks in Arizona. For my good friend and fellow Iowa State Senator Sarah Trungariot, it meant knocking on a ton of doors in suburban Iowa, right? Sarah winds up winning by 29 votes. I mean, that showing up on people's doorstep and having the conversation is the difference between winning and losing.
Absolutely.
And so we think that's a really important part of it as well.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I get this. I think another thing that we both share in common about kind of thinking about the, why we're doing this individually and why we're doing this collectively now is, I'm sure you get the question I get all the time. It's like, where's the bench, right? Just all Democrats get that question. Where it's like, okay, it's not only there, it's like thriving, right? And so, we both know from our experience, I mean, certainly with New Deal, we do a couple new classes a year, as people probably know, 15 or 20 New Deal leaders. For those seats that we have, or the spots that we're able to take people, we have hundreds of nominations. And so I just kind of want to underscore that, because I want to talk about some of the people that we work with and what we can learn from them. But I just want to kind of underscore for people too that this is not like we're having to go out and beat the bushes to find good candidates, right? Like that, to candidates in your case or elected officials in our case, I feel very hopeful, I guess, in the world in which we're currently living right now, that there are people who are still stepping up and who are still running and who are still, doing a great job. And from our perspective, not just still doing it, but like doing it because of what they're seeing, right? Like being motivated to run for office because they want to be part of this, part of a movement to make government work and double down on democracy and all those things. So I don't know if you want to say anything about that, but I just feel like there's so many great people out there. I think that by elevating both of our work together, I hope that people will become more familiar with how many great elected officials there are all over the country.
100% agree with that. And I thought Pete Buttigieg put it really well. He ran for, a lot of folks know he ran for president, obviously, but before he did that, he ran for chair of the DNC. We just had a big DNC chair election I guess 2 months ago now. And this was like way back in 2017, right? I think he was running for DNC chair.
Yeah.
And he came up a little short, but he gave this beautiful concession speech. And he talked in that speech about exactly what you just said. The bench is there. We just need to give them opportunities to get on the field. And I will also say that sometimes, this is one of the things that the Next 50 tries to do. One thing that younger candidates just kind of by definition sometimes struggle with is raising the amount of money that is necessary to be competitive in a primary election and then in a general election. That's just a natural function of being younger, not having as much time in office, not getting to know the folks who tend to write larger checks to candidates. And so we do a fair bit of matchmaking between donors and candidates who are running for office. And there's some groups that will just kind of try to like funnel the money basically and be the gatekeeper. And we really emphasize trying to be less of a gatekeeper and more of a matchmaker and actually connecting people to folks who are interested in supporting candidates for state Supreme Court, candidates for state Senate, candidates for county board of supervisors, whatever the preference is, right, that people have. And so that's really important. And that doesn't happen on its own. I mean, that is something that really requires work. And because you have, I think, a lot of folks in the party who are interested in supporting next generation leaders, but don't necessarily know who they are. The profiles aren't as high, that kind of thing. And we're trying to just make sure that isn't a limiting factor to the promising next generation leaders who are emerging.
Yeah, it's super important. And as you say, it's a fact of life that's part of what it takes to run and stay in office. So I'm glad that you're doing that piece. I want to go back to the point you were kind of making about who some of your leaders are, your candidates are, and some of the New Deal leaders, and what we can learn from them. You mentioned a couple of folks. Another person we have in common that you endorsed and came through New Deal as well is Janelle Bynum, who just won a competitive House seat in Oregon. After the election, we did a post-election analysis, talking to people like Janelle, people like Kristen McDonald-Rivet, who won a House seat in Michigan, and many others who ran ahead of the national party. And you alluded to some of this about meeting people where they are. I mean, a couple things we heard in that conversation with folks was also because people, at the state and local level really know their constituents, can really get to know who they are. When you are made a caricature of things and how, when people start to try to define what a Democrat is, and they're saying, Janelle Bynum is this and this and this, they're like, I know Janelle Bynum. That's not really how I see Janelle Bynum. And you're an elected official. I think that, you probably have this in your district as well. It's it's having those relationships, like you said, at the state and local level, and a broad relationship. I mean, Kristen McDonald-Rivet's folks told us that, one of the things she was really known for was going out and working across the aisle and being where people were, whether it was the Chamber of Commerce or whether it was Union Hall or whatever it was. And so, even within the other party, right, people, when they said Kristen's like this, they're like, no, actually, she's not. I know her. And so I think that's a big part. And then also we heard a lot of just really focusing on the issues that matter most to voters, kitchen table issues, affordability issues, housing, childcare, price of groceries, right? And so across the board, at least for this election cycle, I think some of those folks who we found that were through New Deal, and I suspect for you too, that were successful, were kind of, leveraging both of those qualities.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, that's one of the advantages of working with candidates who are in the state legislature or coming out of local government. Look, you certainly have lots of very important issues that there are some partisan disagreements on at the state legislative level. But this year, probably 85 or almost 90% of the laws that we pass in Iowa this year are going to be on bipartisan votes. And at the local government, again, a lot of these races they're not even partisan, right? It's just a question of like, how do you make sure the roads are drivable? How do you make sure that you're able to pick people's, garbage and recycling up on time? I mean, it's really basic kinds of issues. And then I do think that there is kind of this, it's interesting, the timing of this too, that I feel like there's this almost boomlet of new ideas that are kind of coming up in the Democratic Party right now. This book that Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson just published about this kind of abundance agenda. Mm-hmm. A person who I know that you and I are both a fan of, Jennifer Polka's book, Recoding America, which came out as a year or two ago now, but I think is still a very incisive analysis of the challenges that frankly, the Democratic Party and the left more broadly have put onto government that make it harder for government to actually operate. I'm reading a really interesting book right now called Why Nothing Works by Mark Dunkelman that gets into some of these barriers that people on the left actually have created over time that have made it harder to deliver the progress that people really want to see. And so I think there's some really interesting conversation that's happening right now on the left about, like, how did we get to this point where, given the choice between Vice President Harris and President Trump, a plurality of Americans went with Donald Trump. And I think these are going to be some hard conversations, but I think it's precisely the stakes of where we're at now that make it really important. And even though I think a lot of state lawmakers and local leaders don't necessarily see themselves as like subscribing to a certain like worldview about like abundance is like what we should be doing, I think there is kind of a broad agreement that like, yeah, things really aren't working right now, and obviously everything that's happening in Washington is going to make a lot of those problems a lot worse. And so there's going to be this opportunity for us to think about, what do we want it to look like when we're picking the pieces back up and putting them back together? And even though obviously there's an enormous amount of work to do in terms of trying to stop as much of the damage as we can, and we're starting to see that, I think, all over the country, there's also, I think, a real urgent need for us to think through, what do we want the future to look like? And I don't know if there's anybody better situated to do that than the folks who are serving right now in state and local government.
Yeah, well, I couldn't agree more with everything you just said. And we just, which you will not be surprised by, but we just launched Making Government Work Better series with Jen Polka on this podcast that we're going to be doing over the next few months, which we're super excited about. Mark Dunkelman's a friend from former colleague of mine, and who is going to be keynoting our spring event in May. So I absolutely agree, and I think about this being like the imperative for Democrats actually is to, because we're the party of government institutions, we are always going to be, because we believe government can do good things. We have a special responsibility to make it work well, and we have to own up to the fact that we have been defending some institutions and government that's not been working and not delivering. And so my hope is, frankly, that the DOGE stuff, which is in name a good idea, actually, and in practice, a travesty and a disaster and an attempt to, tear down our government, not fix it, that there will be an opportunity for us as Democrats who believe in reform, believe in all things you just talked about, to show a different way forward, that we too can think, that we also believe government needs to be reformed and so that it delivers for the 21st century, but that means actually reforming it, not just burning it to the ground. So I think hopefully there'll be an opportunity here in all of this.
I would say 100%. And I think that's, to me, the thing that's so frustrating about what you're currently seeing in Washington. I mean, DOGE itself is a joke. I mean, DOGE is like a meme that starts with like this cute dog and then like has now been like bastardized into this, Elon with a chainsaw, the CPAC stage and all of that.
Yes.
But I think the thing that we need to learn from that is that the urgency and the speed with which that they have acted has obviously had some catastrophic consequences because of what their actual mission is, as opposed to what their stated mission is, right? If you're the party of trying to make government work, of course you want government to be efficient, right? I mean, I think it's self-evident that that's the case. The problem is that they actually don't want government to be more efficient. And I think Jennifer is probably one of the best thinkers about how you actually make government work better. So I'm very excited to be able to listen to some of those episodes of my drive to and from Des Moines through the rest of the legislative session here. And I think what we need to do is to take, our lesson from the current way that DOGE is playing out is to learn from the urgency, the speed with which they're moving. And like, even though we disagree fundamentally with their vision, they have like a clear vision, which is to burn it all to the ground.
That's right.
We completely disagree with that. But I think it means that when we are trying to rebuild, that is the same energy that we need to bring in terms of the speed and the urgency and being willing to move mountains in pursuit of what we're trying to do.
Totally agree with you. People just don't have the, patience, nor should they, for, years long process to, marginally fix things. So I agree. I think that's really well said. I want to move us to something, or go back to something you said earlier, but it's kind of about one of your criteria being young leaders. And I think that's another really interesting conversation. I know I'm, always so inspired by New Deal leaders across the country, including you, who are doing really cool things, and then B, bringing a really important perspective. So I'll tee up one, and then I'd love to hear a little bit why you think it's so important that we invest in young leaders in this generational change. And of course, I'm always like trying to move up the number a tiny bit as I get older, because I feel like I'm still young at heart and I count. But I remember interviewing Will Haskell for this podcast actually a while ago. Will was the youngest state senator in Connecticut history, as you know, and we were talking about that fact and that his role in the legislature for, given that fact. And one of the things he said that I will never forget was that he said, there's two things that kind of set me apart. I'm the only renter in my caucus. And I'm the only person who's gone through school shooting drills in my caucus, right? As a high school student. And so, to sit with that for a second, right? Like, here you have somebody who's bringing a perspective when you're talking about, housing, affordable housing legislation, and you don't literally have another person in the caucus that is renting, which so many people are, or the same thing with like when you're talking about gun safety. So anyway, for me, it's like, it's so apparent about why it's so important that we have young people, young voices. It's just a different perspective that is, critically important to have represented. So that's my story, but love to kind of hear your perspective on this.
Yeah, I totally agree. And look, I mean, I was in grade school when Columbine happened. I remember doing school shooting drills when I was in elementary and junior high school. I believe I was the only renter in the Senate when I was elected to the state Senate back in 2018. I was the youngest member of the Iowa Senate when I was elected. 7 years later, I'm still the youngest member of the Iowa Senate.
That's wild. I did not know that. I knew the first part, but not the second part of that sentence. Wow.
I had the pleasure of serving as the youngest ever Senate minority leader, Senate caucus leader, and I'm the youngest ever former Senate minority leader in Iowa. And so, yeah, you bring a different perspective, and it's true on the lived experience piece, which is what we're talking about in terms of those, being in grade school when Columbine happened and those sorts of things. It also is true when it comes to meeting voters where they are. If you are somebody who has never had or hasn't recently had to go through the process of like buying a home, or like right now, like my wife and I are paying for childcare for our 1-year-old, it's really expensive, and when we talk about the cost of living crisis that is facing this country, that is being acutely felt, I think, by Americans of all ages, but it's being felt, I think, most acutely by young Americans who are trying to get started. And I think when you look at the fact there's some data that was released recently by Blue Rose Research, David Shore's outfit, that found a very sharp turn among young voters in this most recent election. I think a big part of explaining that is, for them, this affordability crisis that in their eyes got much worse when Joe Biden was president, and that they did not see a compelling story from Vice President Harris about how she was going to tackle those things. And so I think as a party, it's critically important that Democrats take that really seriously and focus on those issues. And then I think communicate with voters in a way, young voters in particular, that they are able to receive. And a lot of that's coming on social media, TikTok, Instagram. I guess Facebook is not necessarily the platform anymore, but a lot of these places are where those conversations are happening. Podcasts like this one, it may not necessarily be top of mind for normal young people or what have you, but being fluent in these kinds of platforms and media is super important. It's part of meeting voters where they are, and being able to connect the lived experience that young next generation leaders have with the policies that they're putting forward to tackle these problems in a format that people can actually connect with, and then being able to distribute that more broadly through other maybe more traditional sorts of media, I think is a really important part of how we're going to get back to political power.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. There's one more element to, I think, what we both do that I just want to make sure that we highlight before we wrap up, which is, one of the things I love about the work that you guys do is that, there's a lot of, political organization PACs that exist that give money, and then that's kind of the end of the line, essentially. And so one of the things I'm excited about what you do in your own work, but also what we will be able to do collectively together is the sense of community that just doesn't get talked about enough. And I feel like that is one of the superpowers of New Deal, and it's very deliberate. It's by design, and I know that it's something you care a lot about too, which is this idea that people need ongoing support. You talked about it at the top when you were talking about that balance between the three buckets of people's lives as elected officials and candidates. And for me, it's this, one of the reasons I was so excited when we started New Deal and why I think New Deal is so important is that, people think about campaigns and they think that, if we just elect the right people, we're kind of done. And, and I'm always saying, that's crazy. Like there's no other. You think about other people that that are in jobs that doesn't happen. You're appointed CEO. It's not like you're left on your own to go figure out how to be a CEO. You have all these peer networks. You have all these opportunities, these resources to draw on to do your job well. And why would elected officials who arguably have some of the most important jobs in the world to govern our country not be exactly the same? And so this kind of idea that we're going to be there with resources, with support, not holistically to your point earlier, not just, very narrowly, meaning that, and having a group of people around them that they can rely on and that they can draw from as needed is, I think, a really important part of the work we both do. And I just want to kind of, draw that out.
100%. And I would also say that there are maybe 2 or 3 different buckets or ways that plays out. As a New Dealer, I benefited enormously from a lot of the skills development that New Deal was able to offer, especially on the communications piece, which is something, I don't know if Ian's listening, but Ian's a media trainer. So much more than that, but does the media training that I got to benefit from and that was transformative for me as a communicator. Policy ideas, learning about what's happening. Now, obviously, Will's a good example. The housing situation in Connecticut looks a little different than it does in Iowa, but there's still things to learn from where things are playing out. And then the third thing is this community element. I got to chat with one of my Senate Democratic colleagues in North Carolina at a New Deal event and learn about how their caucus has actual bylaws that governs how they operate as a group of elected officials. And I was like, well, hey, we should have bylaws, in our caucus, because that would help make sure that people understand, have clear expectations, clear norms, clear, sets of what's acceptable behavior. And your listeners or viewers might be thinking, wait, you don't already have that? And I'm here to tell you that no, that does not exist in every caucus in the country. And being able to cross-pollinate, to find some of those best practices, to share them, to distribute them is really important. And the other thing, the last thing that I'll say is, we live in a political society or a political, not society, political culture that is like changing and evolving, rapidly, right? And so sometimes the folks who are in leadership roles who have been there for a long time may not necessarily be up to all of the changes that are happening. And so you can't necessarily find all of the solutions or the answers that you need in your state. You're going to have to learn from your peers who are in other states. And one thing that New Deal does so effectively is bring those people together to facilitate those conversations and build those relationships. It's something that we do try to do with the Next 50 in a way. And I think being able to bring our leaders into the New Deal network, have that mutual cross-pollination is going to be fantastic for every New Dealer, for every Next 50 leader, and will hopefully be a big part of figuring out how we turn the ship around so that we can make sure that we have that next generation coming up and are best prepared as they can be to actually govern and lead this country going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a perfect place to end, Zach. I'm so lovely to see you as always. Very excited about the work we're going to do together, both the two of us, but also to bring those Next 50 people into a New Deal and to have you supporting some of the New Dealers and just this symbiotic relationship that we're going to go forward with. And looking forward to what we can do together, just as you said, to kind of make sure that the party in the country is ready for the next 50 years.
100%. We're excited too, Debbie.
Thanks so much, Zach. We'll see you soon.
Thank you.
An Honorable Profession is a New Deal Leaders podcast. Thanks to the team at New Deal for producing this episode. We encourage you to bring honor to public service, and because we keep things honorable, no tax dollars are used in the making of this podcast.
This podcast is part of the Democracy Group.